So I just saw The Last of Us HBO show, and I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I thought it was pretty dope overall. There are some criticisms I have with it, and I guess I'll go into them. I'm a fan of the games. I really enjoyed the first game. I have a lot of criticisms about the second game, but I've only played it once, so we'll see how I feel on a second playthrough. Maybe there's some elements to the story that knowing that they're coming instead of being surprised by it, maybe I'll have a different experience with it. Anyway, if you want my detailed thoughts on The Last of Us 2 as a video game, we actually talked about it on my podcast, Sardonicast, and you can hear us all complain about certain things about it. Anyway, I'm not going to be spoiling any of that in this video. I won't be talking about The Last of Us 2. We're just talking about the show. The Last of Us 1, the first game, has such an incredible story. I think that it is one of the most solid cinematic stories for any video game. Without spoiling anything, there's just certain beats to the story that work so well and are just so emotionally effective, especially how it ends, and there's, moral dilemmas that are just interesting to think about, and you can understand the characters making decisions that you may not agree with, but they're all motivated by something, and the characters are fleshed out, and you feel for them, and you empathize for them. And this show captures that really well, in a way that it's still a television show. There are elements to playing a video game where you might get more out of the experience because you're playing a game. You might connect with the character more because you're controlling that character. You might enjoy the world building more because you're exploring through the world by yourself. You're picking up notes and information about the universe. There's certain things that you can do in a video game that you can't do in a television show. However, the story at its core is already one that is just so cinematic and mature for a video game. Part of the reason why I love the first Last of Us game so much is because it's one of the most cinematic video games ever. It's like, sure, there's gameplay elements, and those gameplay elements work really well, and I enjoy the gameplay. But in terms of storytelling, it is just so strong, and I'm glad that it was translated to a miniseries and not a film, because there's just so much information that you have to pack into this property that it would be impossible to do it in a film. It just wouldn't have the same weight. However, despite that, I do feel like some of the storytelling in this television show was a bit rushed, especially in comparison to the video game, especially having played the first game, at least 3 times, and having some familiarity with the experiences that I had with the first game, comparing it to this television show. There are differences, but I think that overall it did a really great job capturing a lot of the most important parts. And I guess with that, I'm definitely recommending the show. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. You don't need to have played the game to enjoy the show. They're independent, even though they're similar. And it doesn't matter which one you do first. If you're looking forward to playing the game, you can still watch the show beforehand. You can experience either of these properties, and they're offering slightly different experiences, but it really depends on who you are as a person and what you're looking for out of your media that's going to influence which one is best for you. If you're old, watch the show. If you're not familiar with video games, don't try to play a video game. You can just watch a television show instead. I thought that the production design in the show was particularly fantastic. A lot of it matched the game to a really specific degree. There's a lot of character in the environments, and it all looks really, really great. It doesn't look cheap for a television show, especially. There are maybe a few shots in this show where I was like, that looks kind of bad, but they are really few and far between. There is a very clear amount of talent going into the production of this show, and I love the way that it looks, and I love how it's used in the show. The acting is all great for the most part. I have some more specific criticisms about the acting that I'll go into when we talk about spoilers, I guess. But for the most part, really great performances. Pedro Pascal is great casting for Joel. He really embodies the character, and it's great to see him translated in this way. Another thing I absolutely love about this show is the music from Gustavo Santaolalla, who did the music for the video game. I probably butchered his name pronunciation. He's also worked with Alejandro González Iñárritu on many of his films. He did the Babel soundtrack and Amores Perros, and just a lot of really, really amazing music that I love a lot. And I'm glad it was in the show because it's honestly a huge part of the experience of the original game as well. You cannot separate those elements. So if they tried to go with a different composer, it just would not have worked as well. So I'm really really, really glad that they used a lot of the same music from the video game in this show. Spoiler talk! We're in spoiler territory now. So I guess I'm just going to talk about each of the episodes one by one at this point. So I might not have a whole lot to say about some episodes. Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness. I found it interesting that they changed it from 2013 to 2003 in terms of when the outbreak was. It's interesting watching this play out as a zombie television show because there's a lot of the same zombie tropes that we see in other pieces of media, but now it's, you know, just with The Last of Us. Playing through the video game, you played through the daughter's perspective. I think for the entire first level, it was just you played as the daughter. Whereas this television show, it doesn't really just stick to one person's perspective. It's a different experience. And it's interesting watching this show because I have to be kind of on alert, just trying to make sure that the emotions that I'm experiencing watching the show aren't just emotions that I experience playing the game and me being reminded of those emotions. So it is difficult to judge the show as someone who has played the game because it is a challenge to know exactly where those emotions are coming from. I thought that the action set pieces in this episode were just absolutely incredible. It felt like the game, and I love how accurately they captured it and the amount of extras that they have running around, and just it feels like a huge, expensive, but with money not being wasted production. You really get a lot of good production value out of the show. Episode 1, it's really put together particularly well in terms of just the amount of people involved in the production doing their jobs and everybody just doing a really great job. One thing that I hated about this episode was there was an unnecessary flashback at the end. It was like, oh, remember the daughter got shot? And it was just like, okay, well, stop treating me like I'm stupid. I'm not a baby. This show's not for babies. Stop doing that, please. Thank you. Episode 2. I thought that the opening scene in 2003 Indonesia was fantastic. I loved that as a choice. I love where that scene ends and how she ultimately says, like, to bomb the city. Like, these are things that weren't in the original game, and I just love how they're fleshing out the universe and just being like, oh, yeah, okay, what could have happened at this point in time? Are there characters that might have to make these sorts of decisions? I love that they showed that. There's some really great set design in this episode, and again, I'm just looking at my notes. I said in capital letters, I love the production design so much. None of the environments look fake. They all look really interesting. There's great storytelling through environment and visuals. It doesn't feel like a TV show quality TV show, it doesn't feel cheap. I noted that there was a moment where rubble conveniently fell behind them and blocked the door that they came in through. That was very video gamey. It is based off a video game, but I would prefer for it not to feel so video gamey. Does that make sense? Because one of the strongest aspects of the original Last of Us video game is that it didn't feel video gamey, It was more mature. It was a very cinematic video game. It felt like a movie. It was utilizing the medium of video games to its fullest potential. And so, yeah, just these weird tropes and conveniences that show up in video games, I would just prefer for them not to be in the television show adaptation because they don't really need to be there. I loved the pacing in this episode as well, especially as someone that suffered through a couple seasons of The Walking Dead. That was just a soap opera with zombies every once in a while, whereas this was infinitely more compelling. Even without the zombies in this show, it's just infinitely better written and just more interesting characters, and the music and just the production, everything about it. It's just so much better to watch than The Walking Dead. So I'm glad that the torch has been passed. The Walking Dead is over, and now we have like a good zombie show. And yeah, like I actually care about the characters when I'm watching this, which is just very important, but very rare, unfortunately. The death scene at the end, it feels like brutal. Like I actually care about her dying. It's empathetic characters in a horror environment. That's all I want. I want to feel empathy and sympathy. I want to feel for the characters, especially if they're going to be in danger. Otherwise, why put them in danger? There's too many horror films and horror properties in general where they think that by placing characters in danger that you're inherently supposed to care. Like you're just supposed to care because they're in danger. But they don't develop good characters. And they oftentimes make characters that it feels like you're supposed to hate in order for them to die without you feeling emotions. When it's like, okay, what is the goal? Is the goal for me not to feel emotions? Because it feels like that for a lot of horror movies that exist, unfortunately. Episode 3, very controversial episode. for no good reason. Gay characters in the episode. I understand why some people might feel as though because it breaks away from the main cast of characters that they're like, I cared more about those other characters. It's fine to feel that way, but I feel like some people are kind of exaggerating in that sense, or not necessarily fully being conscious of how they're exaggerating that. You know, Ben Shapiro was like, there's no zombies in this episode. It's like, that's literally a lie. There's zombies in the episode. There was a zombie at the beginning of the episode. I think there was some near the end too. And again, something that I mentioned in episode 2 is part of what makes this special is that they develop and flesh out characters and that you care about them. And they're creating characters that you can actually connect with. And this particular episode was just so great at telling a story of these characters and getting me to feel emotions for them, particularly because of the acting. Nick Offerman did an incredible job. This is the best I've seen him do in anything. There's so much to soak in about the characters. So I've seen a couple people refer to this, a couple too many people refer to this as like, oh, you just put in Brokeback Mountain, when that is just such a weirdly, unintentionally revealing thing to say about the person saying it. Because if your only point of reference for just there's gay people in it is just Brokeback Mountain, that's what you would say. If that's like the only property you know of just like there's gay people that are in love with each other, and then your point of reference is just Brokeback Mountain. Brokeback Mountain is nothing like this episode, other than there's two males that are in love with each other. They couldn't be more different otherwise. Like, they're just not the same thing. It's weird that people are making that comparison, and again, unintentionally revealing when you use that as an example, like, okay, like, you only know of one gay property. That's weird. What I particularly love about this episode is the way that Nick Offerman's character is developed. You can tell by his performance and how it's written that he's such an incredibly guarded person that has felt compelled to put up these barriers around him to prevent himself from feeling emotions with other people, prevent himself from trusting other people. Especially the environment of the zombie apocalypse is bringing out the worst elements of what probably already existed in his psyche. And watching him slowly learn to break down his guard and know that it's okay to feel emotion and feel connection with another human being, and watching that develop in such a natural way, it's so well performed and well thought out in terms of expressing a character in a genuine and accurate way. Like, they didn't just bullshit it together like, oh, these two characters are gay and they're in love and that's it. The way people are treating this episode, it's like they're just ignoring the details in terms of how these characters are portrayed. They're ignoring the details. Well, maybe not ignoring, maybe they're just not picking, maybe they're looking for different things, you know? Maybe what they get out of the first two episodes is nothing like what I get out of the first two episodes, and the character writing isn't really a factor or something. I wouldn't like this episode nearly that much if it didn't explore it with depth. That is something that makes this episode stand out in particular, is the depth that these characters have. The way that they're not just insisting something taking place on screen. They're showing something that could just be plucked out of real life. The characters are shining through the screen. They feel like characters. They don't feel like actors portraying characters. Even the other character that's not Nick Offerman's character, the other guy, I forget his name. His expression when he receives the food, something like that, it's just so priceless and genuine. When I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how someone would react to that situation. It feels real. It's not phoned in. It's not thrown together. It feels like they properly spent time with these actors, and they properly spent time with each other even writing it. It felt like they put a lot of thought and care into how this episode was portrayed. When they start playing the piano, the skinnier guy, let's just call him the skinny guy, he's opening the music and he's playing it so imperfectly, and he's figuring it out as he goes. Just a detail like that, that just feels super realistic and genuine. There's a point in the episode where Joel enters the story, and the entire episode is essentially a flashback. But even with Joel entering the story in the episode, we see more to Joel's character too, and we see him and his safeguarded nature, and watching these characters interact with each other, especially because they both kind of have these weird mental barriers that they've put up, and especially in the zombie apocalypse, now feeling justified in those mental barriers. It's great watching them interact. Again, Gustavo's music adds so much to this show. And my one big criticism about this episode is that at a pivotal moment, basically the climax of the episode, they stopped using Gustavo's music and they just played the song from Arrival. And I've already seen Arrival, and I associate that song with Arrival. It's an existing piece of music that I associate with other things. And Gustavo's music's fucking perfect. I love Gustavo's music. And so them using this other track, it's just way too familiar, and it felt like cheating. It felt like, oh, we're going to use this song that is guaranteed to be emotional because of its, just how the chord progression is orchestrated. It would be like using Sia's Breathe Me or something like that. It's been done too many times, and you have the perfect music. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? You already have the perfect music. Keep using Gustavo. That pissed me off. And it did detract from my experience, unfortunately. However, episode 3, my favorite episode, it was awesome. I love how genuine it felt. I love how not bullshitty it felt. I love that we got so much out of the characters, and the performances throughout the entire episode were just like absolutely incredible. The performances were just insane. Yeah, I thought that it was really, really great piece of filmmaking, and people are weird about this one. Just fucking, there's gay people in it is just what it feels like a lot of the criticism was from a lot of people, especially when they're like, this was like Brokeback Mountain. It's like, it's literally nothing like Brokeback Mountain other than the characters are male and in love with each other. Right? I loved watching it develop. It didn't really feel like a sappy kind of like, oh, this is a love story sort of thing. It felt like a genuine story to tell within this environment. It felt like the heightened environment of the zombie apocalypse and just everything going to shit around them and them needing to put up these safeguards and trying to let other people into their lives and just like conversations that they have with each other and the drama that they have with each other. Like, it felt real and it felt special. It was great to watch this episode and have them show like, oh yeah, you can, there can still be people living lives and experiencing something special despite the universe going to shit. This episode proves that there is something worth fighting for. It's not just this dreary, bleak, hopeless universe that exists. The zombie apocalypse didn't wipe out everyone's chance for experiencing moments of happiness in their life. And I think that was important to show. Could have been a straight couple, wasn't, and that's fine. And there's no reason to get upset about that. I feel like there's maybe some people that have difficulty empathizing with characters that are not of their brand of sexuality, which I feel like maybe that's something that should be worked on an individual basis. Perhaps be introspective. If you disliked the episode for other reasons, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. All right. The final shot of episode 3 was also like really perfect. It was like a really great final shot. It was perfect how it ended. Episode 4. It was really short. There's some great character moments, great tone, the joke book being reincorporated. That was fun. I don't remember, in my notes, I said that it felt very video gamey in this episode. I don't remember what about it. There's some very satisfying violence and trauma. Then they brought in a character called Kathleen. I don't know if the implication was that she was supposed to be intimidating, but it just didn't really play off that way. I was watching this episode and I was thinking like, okay, I guess I'm going to give her a chance. I'm going to give her a chance. Yeah, then the episode ended because it was a really quick episode. So there's a controversy from one of the trailers for The Last of Us Part 2. Essentially, Naughty Dog, or whoever created the music for the trailer, ripped off a cover song that the artist Lottie Kestner did. And when I say ripped off, I mean, obviously I'm always skeptical when someone makes that claim. As the person that made the Kimba video, I'm, not just going to blindly believe when someone's like, they ripped off my music. I'm going to actually investigate it. So if you go on the YMS Highlights channel, you can see me investigating it, and I determined that there are unique qualities to the cover that were not in the original song that were directly ripped off in the Last of Us 2 trailer. And I was like, okay, yeah, it seems like they ripped it off. Anyway, I was vindicated by that perspective when Naughty Dog wound up apologizing to Lottie Kestner, and they said that they had made a mistake and blah, 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 blah. So obviously they had a conversation with whoever did the music, and probably they admitted it. What's interesting about the end credits for episode 4 is they used Lottie Kestner's cover. So her track that got ripped off in the Last of Us 2 trailer, which is cool because now that's kind of like an official way to make things right. It's cool that her track was in an HBO show. I'm glad that she got some recognition for it. That's really a really cool way to do that. So that's a little fun Easter egg, I guess. All right, episode 5. the highest rated episode on IMDb for some reason, and I don't know why. I enjoyed the characters, performances were good for the most part. Deaf Kid was good. Henry was good. They killed Kathleen, which was great. I was like, damn, she didn't last very long. She was kind of annoying in this episode too. I was thinking of giving her a chance in the previous episode, but then in this one, I was like, okay, I'm not feeling it, you know? The big infected showed up, and that was kind of video gamey. Something that I really enjoy about the show is when action is taking place, I'm always invested for the most part. I'm always super into the action. It's always fun, and it's great when there's characters you care about that may or may not be in danger. Yeah, sniper scene was awesome. All right, episode 6. I didn't note too many things about this episode. They did a really annoying thing where they had like a dog growling sound effect, and they showed the dog, and the dog is not growling. The dog was clearly just like comfortable and chill, but they added a dog growling sound effect, and it's like, okay, well, you're not showing a growling dog, so where's the danger? This is stupid. I hate that. That's an annoying thing. You shouldn't do that. Who directed this episode? Jasmila Zbanek? Oh, from Kovadis Ida. I liked that movie a lot. Well, teach her that when a dog is growling, it looks like they're growling, and that they shouldn't just add a sound effect because that's annoying. Yeah, I guess my other note for this episode, Joel getting stabbed and injured in the snow feels a lot more rushed compared to the game. And it was super close to the end of the episode when that part even started, so that was weird. Things starting to feel a little rushed. Episode 7. So now we have another episode that is kind of like a same-sex romance episode. Feels very different from episode 3, and I gotta say, this one was just not as strong for me. And the biggest reason why it wasn't as strong is the performances. Ellie is great throughout the entire show. The other girl, Storm Reed, who plays the younger sister in Euphoria, and she was also the main girl in Missing, she's a good actor. They're both really good actors, but they're just not quite at the level where I could believe their chemistry with each other. And that was the biggest difference in terms of like viewing a relationship, if we're going to compare episode 3 to episode 7, is that I just didn't buy that they were interacting with each other. Like they didn't bounce off of each other properly. Like they're still, hopefully, learning as actors. They're very young and they're good. They're very, very good actors, but they're just not quite at the level of insanely fantastic performances that we saw in episode 3. Like Nick Offerman and the other guy. Holy shit. Like, those are the best performances, like, in the entire show, or just in that episode. Whereas this is just not that strong. There's also a moment in this episode, the effect just kind of looked like shit, where the floor broke, and just where it broke, and where they were standing, and it was just like, the weight seemed really off, and just how it fell, I was like, wow. Every other effect in the show looked great. And then just there's this one part in this one episode that's just like, oh, look kind of shit. I didn't buy their screen chemistry, unfortunately. And it got better over the course of the episode. It got better towards the end of it. But just there's things about this episode that just felt so weird and did not work. There's things about it that felt like kind of phony. There's a moment where Ellie's shaking her head and saying like, don't go. I don't know what it is about it. It feels weird and phony. This is also kind of a weird time to have a flashback because there's a very immediate thing happening with Joel where he got stabbed and he's like unconscious and she's like trying to take care of him. That wasn't really a thing that we were breaking away from in episode 3. Episode 3 was like the entire thing was a flashback, but it was like, oh, world building. We're getting more out of this story. Whereas like where they decide to do a flashback here, it was just like, oh, there's kind of like an immediate thing that needs your attention and we're going to talk about this other shit for a while. And the chemistry just like it's not there. And also the context of playing this in the game it was like DLC. In the game, it was literally DLC. So I'm looking at the ratings on IMDb. What stands out to me about episode 3, which was the worst rated episode before episode 7 came out. Now it's the second worst rated episode. So episode 3 has an 8.0, episode 7 has a 7.4. What stands out to me particularly about episode 3 is that it has twice as many ratings compared to like the pilot. The pilot episode, or episode 1, has like 100,000 ratings. Episode 3 has 200,000 ratings because people like Ben Shapiro talked about it and it got brigaded essentially. But I look at episode 7, which is the worst rated episode. It only has 60,000 ratings. It has about as many ratings as a lot of the other episodes around it. And so it didn't seem like this one got brigaded. It seems like people who were actually watching the show just didn't care for this one as much. It just wasn't in the news cycle as much. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the characters are girls. For some reason, socially, female on female relationships in media seem to be a lot more tolerated than male on male relationships. Because I guess girl on girl is hot is the argument. Wasn't a huge fan of episode 7. And just there was this weird triumphant achievement music playing when she's like stitching him up near the end. I thought that was a weird weird choice. Just some weird stuff going on in this episode, and I don't know why. Directed by Lisa Johnson, who are you? Oh, you've directed nothing that I care about. So perhaps that's part of the issue. Perhaps this director just wasn't as strong also. All right, episode 8. Interesting episode. There's a lot to cover in the game. So this episode with Ellie and like the cannibals, and it was well done for the most part. I thought this was not a bad episode, I guess, but with my memory of playing through the last sequence of it and like the boss battle, just felt weird. I don't know why it felt weird in the show, just like kind of rushed, I guess. Also, this happens in the game. It happens in fucking everything, and I'm just sick of it. When a room is on fire, it's gonna fill up with smoke, okay? Stop pretending as if fire doesn't have smoke or that it wouldn't fill up a room very quick. They're just kind of hanging out. Just because that happened in the video game doesn't mean you need to do the same thing in the show. I think if a person consumes enough media and they don't know life skills outside of media, and they're just like, oh, the room's on fire, I don't need to leave immediately because it won't fill up with smoke. I feel like it's a bad thing to show in media so consistently because it might give people the wrong idea and they might die. Episode 9, final episode. I was convinced that this episode would be like an hour and a half. And then I started playing it and I realized it's the shortest episode. It's like 40 minutes, 43 minutes or some shit. It's the shortest episode. And I was like, why? This is the finale. Usually a season finale should be longer. And I don't know. That's my expectation anyway. The beginning of the episode, we got kind of like a backstory explaining why Ellie's blood is immune, which was kind of interesting. We also got, in this episode, we got the second instance of them mentioning Chef Boyardee in the series, which makes me believe it's a product placement now because they're now consistently mentioning it. I was like, okay, the first time they mentioned it, I didn't catch on that it was a product placement because it seemed like, oh, you know, canned food that doesn't really expire. That made sense. But now that they're mentioning it consistently, I'm just like, okay, well, probably a product placement now. Yeah, I wish this episode was longer. There's the entire sequence at the end of the video game where Joel has to mow down the fireflies or sneak past them, you know, maybe light them on fire or whatever. And so that was translated into this episode. But in this episode, it was just a montage. And it was just like, oh, he's killing everybody and he's not flinching. You know, he's doing it without hesitation, which I understand for the character. You know, he's at this point where he's just a killing machine and he has to switch off the part of his brain that feels any emotion for any of the people that he's killing. He's forced into this situation to try and save someone else where he just has to say fuck the world and be selfish. And I get the point of showing that for the character, but I still feel as though the fact that they showed it as a montage and the fact that the end result and what they were showing was just so video gamey anyway, of just like pew pew, he like doesn't even really get hit. There's like no moment of any kind of a struggle, and I was just like, fuck. I was really hoping that they would use the opportunity of this episode to showcase something, to really show off the filmmaking and to design a great action set piece, but it just kind of felt rushed and a little phoned in, honestly, in terms of how it was orchestrated. You know, I think of something like Children of Men. You wouldn't have to do like all in one shot like Children of Men, but you can still show a character getting from point A to point B in a way where they beat the odds and they're lucky, but maybe they're not like a video game character in that sense. Maybe they're not like, oh, it felt weird, especially adapting it to a TV show. I felt like there's another way they could have done it that would have worked better if they had just told the story in real time instead of having a montage with the music. The music was also kind of insisting a lot. That's probably why I felt kind of off-put by it. When your last episode of your season is fucking 43 minutes long for no reason, and then this important action scene at the end is a montage, it's just like, really? It could have been more special. Could have been something where more effort was put into it. I don't know if they just ran out of time and they just decided to do it that way for practical reasons. I have no idea, but it was weird. The whole ending of the first season it felt weirdly rushed, and I was kind of disappointed by it. And then you get to the very last scene, and that worked well, you know, where he's like lying to her and she's like, you promised me that everything you said was real. He's like, of course, yes, I said everything that was real. That was the exact line, I'm pretty sure. But again, now I'm kind of having second guesses about it because the same music is playing from the ending of the first video game. I feel like the ending of the first video game probably tackled that scene better, but it was pretty one-to-one. So like, I don't know. The important parts were there, I guess. Ending in the exact same way makes sense. That's important because it's just already written perfectly, but damn. I really wish they did more with this episode. So overall, the entire show, I thought that the first 3 episodes of the season were a lot better than everything that came after. I thought that the cracks in the seams were really starting to show from episode 4 onwards, but I thought that the first 3 episodes were just like so incredible and just had me with, I guess, almost unrealistic expectations of how the show would continue. But damn, those 3 episodes were really great, especially the 3rd episode. The 3rd episode on its own, I would give like a 9 out of 10 as just like its own thing. The entire show as a whole, Last of Us Season 1, 8 out of 10. It has some flaws, definitely rushed in places. I don't know how the fuck they're going to translate The Last of Us Part 2 into a television show. That feels like something that almost needs to be in a video game. Even the people that love it, the way that they defend it makes it sound like an experience that kind of has to be told through the medium of a video game. So I don't know what the fuck they're going to do, but I'm interested in what they wind up doing. And I think that there's some really great people working on this show, and I'm excited to see more and get Druckmannized. Yeah, 8 out of 10. Really enjoyed it. Some flaws, but damn, there's just some really uniquely great stuff happening in the show that it's just so high above what a lot of other shows are. Again, production design, performances, and just the characters. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much.